Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of the outdoor world, it is officially the second podcast of The Bleeding Edge. I had an idea of how I was going to do this podcast this morning, and I've been kind of like bouncing around the ideas of like going through like my 2021 setup and what that was going to entail. But I think I'm going to save that until I actually have it set up. So I think for this podcast, what I'm going to talk about is just like overall arrow setups for anyone who like has any questions or like anyone who's like wondering about, what I do or kind of like my 2 cents worth on things, because it's going to be different from a lot of people. This year, I'm going to be moving to what most people would consider an extremely heavy arrow. I'm going to be like almost like 650 grains if I can get it to tune the way I want to. And the reason that kind of is, when I first started getting into bow hunting, and I'm kind of the person who always like, oh, I need the best of the best. I'm not going to settle. I'm going to do whatever I can to do everything bow hunting, in the most ethical way, right? So usually what that entails is I research what are the best arrows, what are the pros shooting kind of thing, the people who aren't sponsored, the people who aren't paid to say the things that they need to say to make money and stuff like that. So, I mean, for the majority of, probably the first 2 to 3 months when I first started getting into bow hunting, it was like all arrow stuff. Like, what are the best vanes? What are the best lighted nocks? What are the best arrows? What are the best broadheads? What are the best inserts? What's the best glue? How to set them up? What grain weight should I be shooting? What broadhead should I be shooting in this situation? So, like, I mean, if there's anything I'm good at doing, it's obtaining information and then regurgitating it. I mean, people who know me know that, like, I can recite movies by heart. So, like, if there's anything I'm good at, it's sitting down for like 3 hours on YouTube and just like looking up random videos of arrow setups or, broadhead tests, stuff like that. Before I get started, I think if you guys are really, basically everything I'm going to say is going to come off of primarily 2, if not 3 YouTube channels. And that's going to be Bomar Bow Hunting, The Ranch Fairy, and then Lusk Archery Adventures. And basically the Lusk Archery Adventures, he does like a crap ton of broadhead tests. He goes through like extensive sharpness tests, penetration tests, edge retention. You name it. This guy is the guy to go to if you're looking for like, what is this broadhead going to do in this situation? If it hits heavy bone, whatever. Now, if you're looking for like, what grain weight should I be shooting, or like kind of like the why behind it, that's all up to the Ranch Fairy. I said that in the last episode that you guys are going to hear me talk about him a lot. And that's because I've pretty much soaked in 3 hours worth of total viewing time, like just watching this guy. And like, the dude's a wizard. He doesn't know a lot about like bows and stuff, but he knows a lot about arrows and what to put on them and how it's going to go through stuff. The guy is just a freaking wizard. Anyone who follows the Ed Ashby studies knows that, knows of the Ranch Fairy and knows what he's pretty much done in the past, 3 to 4 years on YouTube to basically try to convince the bow hunting world that if you're not shooting over 500 grains, you're doing basically the animal and yourself a disservice. Also, he pretty much pledges against mechanical broadheads. He calls them flappers, which is kind of funny. And he says that, anything can happen with a mechanical, but, with a fixed blade head, it's, a lot more predictable and a lot more, ethical. I don't want to say ethical, but it's definitely more predictable as to what it's going to do. So with that being said, my arrow setup for 2021 is going to consist of a Victory Rip TKO Elite 250 spine with 120 grain insert-outsert system by Ethics. And then it's going to be a 200 grain head, probably by Eclipse Archery, and it's going to be the Werewolf single bevel in a left bevel. And then on the back end, I'm going to be shooting a nocturnal lighted nock with a 4-fletch, and I'm going to be running the Q2I Fusion X2 vanes. It's a 3-inch vane, and it's about a 1/2 inch tall, very similar to the Max Stealths. I've shot the Max Stealth the last 2 years, and I really love those vanes. Does a really good job shooting fixed blades, and they're also super quiet. But since I've been watching the Ranch Fairy so much too, he primarily uses Q2I. And I think that's only because the arrow company that he's kind of partnered with right now, which is Sirius Archery, I think that's primarily the vanes that they use. So I don't know if he actually prefers them or if that's just, what they've been set up with. But so I'm just going to go basically from the back of the arrow to the front of the arrow, explain everything that I'm doing, and if anything, I'll just put my 2 cents worth in at the end as to like what you guys should maybe, consider shooting. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that like I know everything about, arrows and, should be the exact setup that you should be shooting. But so I'm starting in the back with the nocturnal nock. A lot of people shoot these nocks, John Dudley being probably the person who is like the poster child for nocturnal, I would say. Maybe Balmar bow hunting too a little bit, but he kind of bounces back and forth. The reason I do that is primarily because of this last fall when I had that doe that I hit. I was pretty confident that like, from where she was standing and where I hit, I shot right behind the shoulder. But I was running a white and pink vein setup, so it was still fairly easy to see. But I feel like if I would have been shooting a lighted nock, I might have been able to see it a little more clear. So not only does it allow you to, find your arrow after the shot, but, it allows you to, get a way better picture of like what, or I shouldn't say what you're shooting, but where you're actually hitting when you hit that animal. Especially for you guys who film hunts too. This is a great tool to be able to watch the film back and, know if you have to give that deer some time, if you can go right in and go after it. So that's pretty much why I'm moving to a lighted nock this year. Is I just want to be able to see. It's gonna kill my FOC a little bit. And for you guys who don't know what FOC is, I'll get to that in a minute. But it's like 10 grains heavier than the regular Victory nock. So it does kill your FOC a little bit in that way. But to be able to see where you're shooting, and confirming a little bit more in your mind about where you hit that animal is going to be pretty beneficial to me, I think, this season. But that's pretty much it for that. And then moving just up is going to be like the veins. Like I said, I'm going to be shooting the Q2I veins. And like I said, it's for no reason primarily than pretty much like the ranch fairy shoots them. And I love to tinker. There's another guy on YouTube that I love to watch, and that's Elk Shape. And his motto is kind of like always be tinkering, always be switching things up. Nothing's ever perfect. So like, I loved the max stealth. I would have been perfectly fine shooting the max stealths this year. But like I said, I just wanted to mix things up a little bit. So like I said, it's a 3-inch vein. It's pretty short, so it's a low profile, but it's a long vein, and it's really good at steering those fixed blade broadheads. I think most of the people who shoot like a blazer vein or like a bully vein, or maybe even the boning heat veins, it's a shorter vein, but it's also a higher profile vein. So, and primarily every time I've seen people use that, it's mostly using expandables. I'm not going to say, solely, but I'd say for the most part, people who shoot like a blazer or a bully vein are probably shooting like a Schwacker, a Rage, a Sever, an NAP, whatever. I haven't seen a ton of people shoot those veins with a fixed blade, but not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure if you have a perfectly tuned arrow, you can put whatever vein you want on the back and it's going to steer just fine. But I also am running a wrap on the back of my arrow. It's just only because I think the veins stick better that way. I didn't have a lot of trouble with the max stealths getting them to stick if I properly clean the shaft and whatever. But I usually just use like a barely enough to cover the veins, 4.5 inch wrap with the 3-inch vein. That's about all I use. And that's just to get the veins to stick a little better if I do happen to nick one if I'm shooting in the range, or put one through a target or something, or even put one through an animal. You want it to stick for the most part. So, and then we're just going to go to the arrow itself. I've shot Victory since I started hunting. This is going to sound just ridiculous, but this was back when I was naive and didn't know much about bow hunting. The first arrows that I ever had were actually the Shields brand, but they were the Victory Vendettas, and they were a standard diameter shaft, and they were a 350 spine with probably a 20 grain insert and a 100 grain head with 3 blazers on the back. So that arrow was maybe 400 grains, and I'm like, maybe. I think I did the math, and it was like 389 or something, just ridiculous. And I did kill a deer with that arrow, got a perfect pass through, and it was like 25 yards. I broke 2 ribs, and I was shooting a hybrid head at the time. I was shooting the Bloodsport Gravedigger, so that's got 2 fixed blades and 2 mechanical blades. And I still don't know to this day how I zipped through that deer that easy, because, well, I guess I'll just go through that story a little bit. It was the weekend before slug season, and I was sitting up in the tree. It was cold, but it wasn't like terrible cold. It was, the last weekend of October, and it was maybe 30s, in the morning. There was frost on the ground, but it wasn't like terrible freezing. And all of a sudden, this little 8-point walks out. He's got not a care in the world. And he just comes up and he starts hitting this little licking branch that's like 25 yards from my stand. I had all the time in the world, drew back. I mean, my problem is when I get anchored, my first instinct is put the pin on him and shoot him. It's almost like target panic in a way. And that was before I even knew what target panic was. I mean, I was a very mediocre shooter back, I don't know, 2 years ago. It's almost 2 years ago now. Wow, that's a long time. But so, I mean, I had just a little simple fuse, fixed pin, 5-pin sight. I put the 20 pin on him because I knew that I guessed him at 20. I mean, I guessed wrong by 5 yards, but because I was shooting such a light arrow, it didn't even matter. And I'll get to that in a second too. But put it back, hear the thwump, and he like jumped 5 feet like nothing even happened. And the ranch fairy talks about this all the time when he talks about like why you should be shooting a super heavy arrow. It's like they don't even know what happened. And that's exactly what happened with this buck. It's like I put one through both ribs. I mean, it was perfect, double lung, top of the heart. I mean, it was like thunk right through him. And it was like the perfect sound. I mean, he ran maybe 15 yards. He looked back at me, and then he just like laid down, and then he was done for. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then, you know, I see some people who are shooting like a 75-pound bow and like a 450 plus grain arrow with a mechanical, and they can't even get a pass through. So it's like, what the heck is going on? So I don't know, but that's kind of the story of like how I started into my arrow building or whatever. Because I just had the guys at Shield build them. I didn't know anything about them. I was the typical guy who just kind of walks into the pro shop. Yep, I need some arrows for deer hunting, and then they build them, and then you don't ask questions about it later. So after that season, I was like, okay, I started watching these videos. I'm like, well, how heavy is it? You know, and I started doing some math. I had the arrows cut at 28 inches. I mean, I looked up the grain weight per inch on the shaft or the GPI, and it was just, ridiculously light. And I'm like, how in the heck did I get a pass around this deer? So then the next season, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna build some better ones. But this was before I was still really concerned about speed, and I'm still kind of a speed guy. I mean, I like to stay, above where I'm not really throwing rainbows at them, because that can play into a whole lot of different things later in the game. But so I was still kind of concerned about speed. Everything I was watching from the ranch fairy, it was like, if you're not shooting 550 or above, you're not doing it right, is basically his motto. I mean, I don't think he's ever shot an arrow under 550 grains after he started, reading the Ed Ashby studies and kind of building the arrows his way. But I was like, God, and then I was planning my elk hunt too at the time, or I was talking about it. I shouldn't say. I wasn't fully committed on going on this elk hunt yet. So I was like, God, what should I do here? Well, I knew I wanted a super straight arrow because I didn't want to deal with, I knew I was going to shoot a fixed blade. So, because in Idaho, you can't actually shoot a mechanical, which is just nice. I think that's just a great thing. There's going to be people out there who's like, I've shot elk with mechanicals for 25 years, and that's great. But in my personal opinion, I don't think that they should be used on a giant animal like that. But so I knew I was going to be shooting a fixed blade head. So I knew I was going to want a super straight shaft, and I knew I was going to want longer vanes than my blazers. That was already out of the gate what I was going to do. Some of the people who I primarily started watching was John Dudley of Knock On. He's with PSE now, does a great job over there. He had, basically his whole Knock On series where he would kind of coach you through some things. And I was watching a lot of arrow building stuff, a lot of fletching stuff. And every time he basically had his max stealth vanes on there. And he shoots a Rage primarily. So, I wasn't like fully sold on it yet. So I did a lot of research, and it was, a lot of people were saying it was one of the quietest vanes. It was one of the best steering fixed blade, vanes. So I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. So back to getting on to the Victory shaft is, my friend Austin, he had been shooting Victory. He'd been shooting I don't know, it's not really like an off-brand, but it was basically the exact same arrow, but it was made by, I think, 365 Archery. But it was pretty much the exact same arrow. It was basically like a carbon weave, super straight shaft. And he was just put the standard 60 grain insert there with a 125 grain head, sitting right at about 475. And he was shooting a pretty slow bow at the time. And then he moved up to the Bowtech SR6, which that thing is just a freaking awesome bow. So I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So I kind of did the math, and I was always trying to, every person I watched on building an elk arrow was like, you better have 14% FOC, which FOC means front of center. So the analogy that people usually always use is like, when you have a balanced arrow, you're typically sitting at about 8 to 10% FOC. So if you go to the middle of the shaft where, it's perfectly balanced, and then if you move towards the tip of the shaft, whatever that percentage is how much is left of the shaft. So say you start in the middle of the arrow and you have 20% FOC, that means the remaining 80% of that half is what it's balancing on. So the higher FOC, the more weight is in the front of your arrow. And typically with FOC, the higher it is, you're going to get better groups. You're definitely going to get better penetration, and you're going to get a way better flying arrow. So I was doing a lot of research on FOC, and that's kind of where I ran into the Ranch Fairy, because he builds them up. I mean, he's pretty much 18% minimum FOC. So I knew that I wanted to shoot Victory, and I knew I wanted something around 14% FOC, because that's what everyone was telling me I needed for an elk build. Well, I didn't want to shoot over 500 grains because I was still stubborn about speed at that time, because my power max only IBOs at 328 feet per second, something like that. So I was a little concerned about, the speed, and actually, I didn't want to be hucking a rainbow at an elk. I didn't really know what a rainbow was at the time. 475 grains is, I was still shooting that arrow at like 270 feet a second. This was back when, like, if I'm not shooting 300 feet a second, I'm shooting slow. This is still naive me at the time. So I ended up building, actually, the Victory, the RAPs in a 300 spine with just the typical 50 grain insert and then 125 grain head, and then the 4 Fletch Max Stealths on the back. And I didn't shoot a lighted knock, so you can't have a lighted knock in Idaho, which is beyond me. I don't know why they just don't do that. I feel like a lot more animals would be found that way. Whatever. Just my 2 cents worth. So yeah, that was my setup going into this year. And I was shooting the Bone Broadheads 125 grain left bevel, single bevel. And the reason I was shooting a single bevel, for those of you who don't know what a single bevel is, basically it's just a 2-blade head, but when you look at the head, only one side is sharpened. So you have, if you're looking at it, if you set the broadhead flat on the ground, only the left side of the broadhead was sharpened. And then if you flip it over, it's same on the other side. The reason for that is when it hits something, it will automatically start twisting, and it'll spin in the direction of that bevel. So mine being a left bevel, it's going to spin to the left once it hits the animal. And the reason that basically single bevels exists is for like trad guys who use their traditional hunting setups. They're shooting pretty heavy stuff. They need to penetrate. They're only pulling 40, 50 pounds probably at the max. And primarily their shots are close, but they need that arrow to penetrate through. They're not looking for a giant cutting surface. They're just looking to kill that animal with a pretty basic setup. So they need that to penetrate through bone when it needs to, being that you're primarily just aiming down the arrow. So I was shooting a really small head. It was less than an inch wide, and it wasn't probably more than an inch tall. And we hand sharpened them, so they were super sharp. But I was concerned with, how slow I was shooting. Back then when I thought it was slow, and this is a big freaking animal. When you look at an elk, and then some people say 400 grains, some people say 550 grains. It's like there's no middle ground. There's no one solid answer that's like, oh, you're going elk hunting, you need this. Oh, you're going deer hunting, you need this. It's like everyone's all over the map. So I don't want any of you guys to take what I'm saying right now to heart necessarily. But this is just my 2 cents worth. And like I said, if there's anything I'm good at, it's just regurgitating information. So yeah, that was my setup going into this year. And I never got an opportunity to shoot at an elk, but I did blow through my doe that I, didn't end up finding till the next morning. But I don't really know how much bone that I necessarily hit, but it still blew through her. Every deer I shot at, the arrow's blown right through her, under 400 grains to almost 500 grains. So that kind of begs the question as to why I'm going to be switching to a 650 grain setup for next year. Well, there's a few answers to that. Primarily when I whitetail hunt, and I don't think I'm going to be elk hunting this next year just because I'm probably going to draw my bear tag, and that's going to be kind of during the same time in Minnesota. But primarily when I whitetail hunt, my shot is really, there's a trail that goes right in front of my stand that's 30 yards. So, there's a great video that you guys should watch, and I think I might link it in the description of this video, and it's by Brandon McDonald, and he's kind of going over like arrow builds, and it's a 3-part series, but this is the 3rd episode. And he starts talking about why trajectory kind of matters when he's talking about arrows, and like why speed doesn't matter but trajectory does. And he goes outside at night, and then he takes like an 800 something grain arrow and then a 450 grain arrow, and he shoots them side by side, and then he like shows you the video, and it's just crazy stupid how little the difference is in speed. Like if you really do the math, I mean 300 feet a second and like 220 feet a second, I mean that's 80 more feet in a second, but like when you actually time it, it's little to nothing. I mean, when he shot that 800 grain arrow and then he shot that 450 grain arrow and he showed them side by side, I mean, it was dunk dunk. I mean, it was so little that it was just ridiculous. He had also mentioned that like the difference between like either a 400 grain arrow and a 600 grain arrow, or a 450 and a 600 grain arrow. It really doesn't matter. But like the difference in speed to impact was 0.1 seconds. To me, that's just ridiculous. 0.1 seconds. Yeah, I mean, he does mention that like, yeah, whatever animal you're shooting at can move more in that 0.1 seconds. But it's a point of a second. And you're shooting a 600 grain arrow that will probably blow through anything in North America that you're shooting at, quite frankly. So like it really begs the question as to why more people aren't doing this. So another thing is there's a small chance that I'm going to be hunting Iowa next year on a property that got some really freaking big animals on it. I mean, 170 class, 200 plus pounds. I mean, just freaking beasts. And the reason that I'm doing this too is, when I lost my doe this year, I had to shoot behind her shoulder because her front, the leg that was facing me, she was perfectly broadside, but the leg that was closest to me was back, and I didn't really notice it until after I shot. So I mean, if I would have taken my time a little bit more, I might have been able to put it on the shoulder a little bit more, because I think I would have been fine with the arrow setup that I was using. But if I would have known that her shoulder was kind of covering the vitals, I would have put it on her shoulder. And then, if you're shooting a really heavy setup like 650, you will blow right through it, no problem. Like, I don't think there's a whitetail in the world that could hold a 650 grain arrow in the shoulder blade and not get a full pass through. I'm sorry. I mean, the ranch fairy, he primarily shoots hogs in Texas. And if you're asking my opinion, those hogs are a lot tougher than a whitetail. And he's taking, these arrows that are going 240 maybe feet a second, and he's launching them through these pigs, and he's literally attempting to break the offside shoulder. Like, that is his goal every time he launches an arrow, is to just break that offside shoulder. And the amount of like pass throughs that he gets is just ridiculous on these pigs. And more often than not, yeah, it's like he says, they don't move. I mean, they don't realize what happened, and then they only run 60 yards, and then you don't end up with a headache at the end of the day. It's like you don't have to worry about bones anymore. It's just like, yep, wherever I put this arrow, it's going through it. So no matter if I'm ground hunting and he comes in quartering 2 really hard, or I'm tree stand hunting and I have a weird angle where I have to put it on top of the shoulder blade to get that right angle through the lungs, I'm never going to have to worry about, trying to avoid bone. And when you think about it, like I was going back before, whether you're shooting a 450 grain arrow or a 400 grain arrow, whatever it was, and a 600 grain arrow, it's 0.1 seconds. And that test was conducted at 60 yards. 0.1 seconds at 60 yards. So 30 yards, 0.0005 seconds. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me, really. And then I'm going to be shooting an 80-pound bow this year for the most part, I think. And then, if I really did my math right, it was pretty loose math, I'm still going to be shooting it slightly slower than I was shooting my Power Max this year. Right around 260 probably is where it's going to end up for a 650 grain arrow. So that's kind of like why I'm going to be shooting what I'm shooting. And then I'm still going to be running a single bevel. It's just going to be a lot bigger. It's going to be almost 1.25 inches wide by, I think, 2 inches tall. And what that's going to do is just going to help me split bone better. It's going to help me get the penetration I need if I decide to take a heavy quartering in shot or even a frontal shot, depending on, if I'm ground hunting or, whatever. If I draw my bear tag, I'm not sure what broadhead I'm going to shoot, actually, because this is kind of where I get into my mechanicals or fixed blade head's better. And I don't really have a great answer for that. I think primarily if you're hunting a big game animal, you will never go wrong with shooting a fixed head. But it's possible that things could go wrong with the mechanical. And that's probably all I'm going to say is I'll shoot a turkey with a mechanical all day, and I won't not shoot a mechanical at a whitetail. But like I said before, if you have that situation where you're going to have to shoot a shoulder blade or it's a frontal shot, there's no way I would be comfortable shooting a mechanical in that situation. Sorry. Maybe with a super heavy setup, but even then, a mechanical has too many moving parts. Too many things can fail. So, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents worth on that. But when it comes to my bear hunt that I'm probably going to draw my tag for September, I don't know if I'm going to hunt them with my bow or not, or if I'm going to shoot them with the rifle. But either way, it comes to the point that, like, a lot of people say a bear is even more, like, wimpy than, like, a whitetail when it comes to, like, the arrow you need to actually penetrate and kill that animal. So, I mean, that kind of begs and I mean, their shoulders are really far forward from their vitals. Actually, their vitals are a little bit farther back than a whitetail. So that kind of begs the question, do I want a 2.5-inch cut mechanical to really put that bear out just in a couple minutes, maybe even seconds? Or do I want to just stick to my same 650 setup, blow right through him, no problem. Wherever he stands, he's going to die. I mean, I'm probably going to shoot this bear over a feeder. I mean, that's how you primarily hunt a bear unless you're spotting and stalking out west somewhere. Excuse me. But I'm primarily in Minnesota. You just shoot them over bait because they're just so few and far in between. So I mean, I'm gonna have plenty of time to anchor. I'm gonna have plenty of time to wait, for him to turn the way I want him to. So I mean, it's not gonna be like the rut where, oh crap, he's there. Draw back, find the vitals, shoot him. I mean, so I'm still on the fence of whether or not I'm gonna shoot a mechanical if I draw my bear tag. If I hunt him with my bow, I mean, that's all still up in the air. But one thing I will shoot mechanicals for primarily though is turkeys. I did shoot my first turkey with a bow last spring, and I shot him with a Schwacker 1.75 because, again, I was just a naive kid who was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to shoot a slightly, shorter cut at 1.75 just so I can make sure I penetrate all the way through him. It's like I could have freaking shot him with a straw. I mean, turkeys are not tough at all, if you ask me. So, I mean, this year I'm probably going to still shoot my 475 grains with the Schwacker 2.5 cut. And I mean, what do you have to worry about with a turkey, right? I mean, it's fat and it's feathers and their bones are hollow. So, I mean, I think you could shoot a 200 grain arrow at a turkey and probably go right through it. But that's just me. And I feel like, if people who are concerned about mechanicals not opening sometimes, because that is a problem that happens, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of mechanicals fail, is they just don't open. And rage is kind of, I don't know. I'll never shoot a rage, that's for sure. I've heard way too many things about like the broadhead opening like halfway and then coming back shut. I don't know. I don't really trust I don't trust a mechanical that opens from the back. I'd rather shoot like a Schwacker that opens from the front. But if I'm gonna shoot a turkey with it, with a whitetail, it's hard. It's like the blade's instantly open, but then it's like, you have like the lung tissue and all that other stuff that has that potential to kind of close that broadhead back up if there's not enough pressure. With a turkey, it's like it's constantly tugging because everything's loose. So, I mean, you're going to hit that animal, it's going to start opening those blades, and then once they're open, I mean, everything's loose. It's just going to keep tugging, and then it's just going to keep open and it's going to stay open. And that's why I really like shooting a mechanical for turkeys because, one, they're not tough. You don't need to worry about penetrating a turkey. And if you hit them, the argument always is if you hit them where they're supposed to, you don't need to worry about penetrating. Well, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But things happen in the whitetail woods that, don't necessarily happen in the turkey woods. I mean, you can shoot a turkey wherever you want. You're probably going to get a pass through. I mean, my shot was pretty much, he was facing straight away from me. And my shot was just maybe 2 inches left, 3 inches left maybe. But I was shooting an arrow that was not tuned, so in my defense. And I basically chopped his leg off, and he flapped maybe 30 yards and laid there, and then all of his buddies went and picked on him. So, I mean, yeah, I'll probably always shoot a mechanical at turkeys, but as far as my bear hunt or whitetails, that I don't know, I'm still on the fence. I'm definitely not going to shoot a mechanical at a whitetail this year. I want the best chance possible that I'm going to be able to blow through whatever bone I need to when the time presents itself. So now, I mean, kind of, we're not on the broadhead topic, so I might as well keep going. When it comes to, since I'm primarily a fixed head guy, I'll just stick with those. Like, what are the brands that, you know, I would maybe recommend, or like maybe the good ones that for those of you who don't really know, you know, what broadhead to shoot, you're looking for good companies. It depends on how much you want to spend, really. If you're looking for a really good single bevel, if you can still find them, I do like the Bones. It's a really good penetrating head. I like when we easily got them pretty sharp. I mean, we hand sharpened them on a diamond stone and then a strop. Another good one would be the Werewolves by Eclipse. That one has probably the widest cutting single bevel that you're gonna find. It's almost 1.25 inches. I don't think they make one that's much wider than that. Those are the only two. Well, not the only two, but one of the only two that you're also gonna find in a left bevel. And I'll go over a little bit why I shoot a left bevel here in a second, but. You have the Grizzly Sticks. Those are really good heads. Lots of good things about those. You have the Cutthroats. Those are a little cheaper head, but still great steel. Iron Will came out with their single bevel line here for 2021. That's only in a right. God, I'm kind of blanking now. There's a whole bunch of them. There's A Bauer, Abowyer. Those are pretty good too. I haven't seen a whole lot of reviews on those. But I mean, they look really good. I mean, it's stainless steel. So basically, whatever you want to spend, you're basically gonna get either stainless steel, you're gonna get carbon steel, or you're gonna get like S7 tool steel. And S7 tool steel is gonna be like the best edge retention. I mean, you're gonna be able to shoot through a mountain, and when it passes through on the other side, it's still gonna be sharp. That's basically what you're getting with S7 tool steel. All the rest of them, they're gonna blow right through it, but they might not be like shaving sharp by the time you get done with them. But you can get them stropped back up, no problem, 5 minutes. I mean, you're fine. So in terms of just like non-single bevel heads for fixed blade, still probably your Iron Wills are going to be good, either the solid wide or just the regular solid in whatever grain you want, because they come with bleeders too, so that's going to punch a heck of a hole. Annihilator, they came out with a head this year. That is their XL. And you know that's got some cool tech in there too that I might go in depth on another like fully broadhead video in another podcast, but I feel like I'm just kind of rambling on with this one. But what other good ones are there? Grim Reaper. For me, when I was gonna go on this elk hunt, it was pretty much between the single bevel and then the Grim Reaper Micro Hades. That's kind of it's a tinier cut. But man, was that thing quiet for a fixed blade, and man, did it fly. I mean, that thing was a laser beam. It was easily the best broadhead that I shot, and I didn't do a really good job of building my arrows when I did them. I didn't quite square the end of the arrow, so it didn't quite spin 100% true, and because of that, it led to really poor broadhead flight in the broadheads that I actually wanted to shoot, which were the Q80 Exodus, and that is also a super really good fixed blade head if you guys are interested in that, but. I mean, I'm probably gonna go more in depth on a broadhead video here in the future, talking about other good heads that I'm just kind of blanking right now. But anyway, I'm gonna go back to kind of the right bevel versus left bevel, and like I said before, like when you have a single bevel, it's only sharpened on the one side, and that creates that twist. Basically, whenever you shoot your arrow spins one way or the other, and usually when they call it arrow clocking. You basically put a bear shaft in your bow, you shoot it at like 5 feet, and then you can just tell whichever way it's spinning naturally out of the bow. And I'm going to say 99.99% of the time, arrows are going to spin to the left. So because of that, I shoot a 4-fletch with like a 2 or 3 degree left offset with a slight helical, whatever you want to call it. And that creates that natural spin to the left. And most people have their vanes fletched to the right. And as a result, that causes a short stall in the arrow where the arrow doesn't spin because it naturally wants to spin left. But because the fletchings are on the back wanting it to spin right, there's probably a 10 to 15 foot window where the arrow's not spinning at all. And that creates, a little bit of lag in the efficiency of the arrow. It's not going to spin as fast. It's not going to spin as many times. But from an accuracy standpoint, they're probably really close to the same. So if you're looking to shoot a single bevel, you don't want to shoot, excuse me, the bones or anything else with a left bevel. You just want to shoot right. You're probably going to be fine. But for my sake, I guess I've always shot left, and primarily the reason that a lot of people don't make the single bevels in a left bevel anymore is because they're concerned about the broadhead unscrewing when it hits the animal because it's naturally twisting to the left. I didn't have a problem with that when I was shooting them into targets. They never came loose. I never had a problem with it when I blew through my doe. So, I mean, if you're looking for my 2 cents worth on, if you want to shoot a left bevel because your arrow is going to be more efficient, it's going to spin more, you're probably going to get more rotation through that animal. You're going to create a bigger wound channel through that animal. I mean, I would shoot the left bevel if you're interested in the few heads that are offered. Just because it makes for a much more efficient arrow. It's going to spin more. It's going to spin faster. The faster it spins, the more it's going to correct, the inconsistencies in flight. So, I mean, really, if you think about it, my arrow that I'm going to be building is going to be just over 20% FOC. So it's already going to fly great because of that, because the head is pulling the shaft, right? The arrow has to work way less hard because the front of the arrow is just pulling the shaft into the target. And then it's already going to be naturally spinning to the left. And then I'm going to have a long vane that's meant to steer a broadhead, spinning that to the left. And I'm already going to have a super straight shaft with a lighted nock. I mean, when you think about it, this is just a recipe for an absolute freaking laser beam that's going to go through anything you touch it with. I mean, I'm going to be afraid for the freaking 3 trees behind the deer that I shoot at, because it's probably going to go through them too when you really think about it. And I'm super stoked to get this setup made. And I'm really, really excited to hunt with it because, like I said, I've always been kind of a speed demon. But when you really crunch the numbers and you really look at the timing of, like you said, a 400 grain arrow and an 800 grain arrow, and it's like so little of a difference. Yeah, please go check that video out. I'll link it in the description. But yeah, it's just a recipe for disaster, man. And it's just a shame that some of these people are just like, I will shoot a sub 450 grain arrow with a mechanical, and that's it. You're not going to talk me out of it, and that's fine. I'm not trying to use this platform as like a way to convince anyone to do anything. That's other people can do that, but I think that's why I'm going to title this as like my 2 cents worth, because I like to talk about this stuff. I mean, there's not a lot of people on the planet that love to listen to me for almost 40 minutes now just talk about random arrow stuff, So, anything else we can touch on before I get that far? I don't. Well, maybe we can go over. I'm going to save that for another video. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up then. We're almost at 38 minutes. I've babbled on a lot. I went from, this one wasn't really organized as organized as I wanted it to be. I kind of babbled on a lot. I'll try to structure the next one a little bit more, but that's pretty much, why I'm building the arrow I am building for 2021. Kind of a little bit of the science behind, why I'm shooting as heavy as I am, kind of why I'm building the way I am, and why, I only shoot certain broadheads, certain situations, that kind of thing. So I did hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Like I said, we're right in our time frame again, which is good. I did babble a lot, but I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys could please, if you enjoyed, hit the subscribe button and the like button. And if you're really interested, you can hit that little notification bell, which will let you know every time I post. And thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of The Bleeding Edge, and I will see you all in the next one.